I used to think the forest just slept at night, that its silence was natural, peaceful even. But the woods around the old mining town of Greystone Hollow weren't sleeping. They were waiting. My brother Lucas and I were deep in the Appalachians, our final stop in a series of cryptid investigations. We weren't amateurs. We'd interviewed dozens of so-called witnesses, camped in haunted ravines, even caught a glimpse of something strange once in Michigan. But Greystone was different. It wasn't just the stories. It was the way they whispered, them. Like the town itself might be listening. We'd heard of a mutilated deer found just beyond the abandoned coal tunnels. Locals said its insides were torn out, but its bones were arranged in a perfect spiral. Most dismissed it as wolves. Lucas said it wasn't, so we hiked in. The town had long since rotted away, half buried by vines, overtaken by pine, and eaten from within by mildew and time. The air had weight, and the fog rolled through the trees in slow, heavy breaths, like the land was alive and exhaling secrets. Our gear was minimal. DSLR cameras, EMF meters, motion sensors, a drone with night vision. Lucas had brought our father's old field journal. I'd brought my doubts. We made camp just beyond the collapsed chapel, where moss had overtaken the altar and trees burst through the wooden floorboards like resurrection gone wrong. That night, we heard it. Not an animal, not a man. A cry like metal twisting layered beneath a low growl, inhuman and ancient. Something nearby responded with a grunt like the earth itself groaning in fury. We didn't sleep. The next morning, Lucas found claw marks on an old birch tree. 5 gashes, each one a foot long. Bark peeled clean off like something had dug in with surgical hate. "I've seen Bigfoot sign before," Lucas whispered. "This isn't that, this is territorial." We followed the trail, shallow graves of bones and feathers, a deer carcass missing its skull, and then we found it. The stone circle, 12 towering rocks, each carved with symbols we couldn't read, like someone tried to warn in a language no one had spoken in centuries. The ground inside was scorched black, yet frozen to the touch. Lucas knelt at the center. I kept my distance. "This is it," he whispered. "This is where it started." I was about to ask what it meant, when the wind stopped. Not slowed, stopped, as if sound had been turned off. No birds, no rustle, no breath. Then the fog parted, and I saw them. A werewolf, towering, fur matted with blood, muscles twitching with barely contained rage, stood facing something even larger. A creature half silhouette, half shadow, like a mountain had grown limbs. Its eyes glowed red. Its hands dragged across the soil, leaving grooves in the earth. Bigfoot, but not like the stories. This wasn't a lost primate, this was a beast of wrath. They clashed. I didn't film it. I couldn't move. Their battle was a storm of teeth, claws, roars, and earth-shaking blows. Trees split, rocks cracked. The circle pulsed with every strike. Then, they stopped, and both of them turned toward us. Lucas and I ran. We didn't speak. Not until we reached the ruins of the coal tunnels, our lungs burning, our minds reeling. "What the hell did we see?" I gasped. Lucas looked pale, terrified. "A broken pact." I stared at him. He held up our father's journal, flipping to a page I'd never seen. It wasn't his handwriting. One guards, one punishes. When the balance breaks, both hunt. But what Lucas didn't tell me then, what he'd hidden since we arrived, was that we had already stepped into the pact circle days ago, and the forest had already chosen who would pay for it. If you're still out there, mark your door with ash before the moon turns red, before they come for you too. We stayed in the chapel that night, if you could call it that. No walls, just rotted pews and crumbling stone under a cathedral of bone-white trees. Lucas insisted it was protected ground, whatever that meant. I barely slept. Not from fear, not yet, but because the woods had changed. It wasn't just quiet, it was wrong. The wind didn't move the same. The branches swayed, but there was no breeze. The fog didn't roll in, it pulsed. I started recording everything, even when nothing happened. Lucas said the circle we found wasn't just ritual, it was burial. Not for people, for things, creatures that walked before names. He believed the werewolf and the other thing, we didn't dare say Bigfoot anymore, were bound there by a covenant older than this country. kept in check by the land, the moon, the pact. I told him he was losing it. He told me I was blind. That's when we met Calla. We'd spotted her from a distance moving through the trees with a torch and a leather satchel. At first I thought she was a hiker, but no one hikes out here in this kind of silence. She wore a cloak stitched with animal bones. Her hair was long, dark, tangled with feathers and pine needles. Her eyes were sharp, too sharp. "I saw your lights," she said. "You shouldn't be here." Lucas was quick to jump in. Cryptid researcher, harmless curiosity, no weapons. She didn't look impressed. "You found the stone circle, didn't you?" I didn't answer. Neither did Lucas. "You've disturbed the Hollow," she muttered. "Do you know what it does to people like you?" "What do you mean?" I asked. She looked at me like someone glancing at a corpse already halfway buried. "It doesn't kill you outright," she said. "It undoes you, piece by piece." Lucas asked who she was. "I keep watch," she replied. "My family's done it for generations. My great-grandmother helped bind the forest after the Pact War. That was the last time the Hollow nearly broke free." She pulled something from her satchel, 3 bundles of bones bound with red twine. "Charms," she said, "for warding." She threw one to me. It smelled like rot and lavender. "I'll take you as far as the mountain's edge," she offered. "After that, you're on your own." We didn't argue. We followed her, but the forest didn't. The path twisted back on itself. Trees moved. I swear they moved. We'd walk for 10 minutes and somehow end up back by the chapel. That's when it started. The voices. At first it was just static on my mic, then breathing. Then my name, not whispered, spoken, in my voice. Lucas heard it too. Calla said we were marked. She told us not to answer, not to speak to them, even if they sounded familiar. "You're not being hunted," she said. "You're being learned." I didn't know what that meant then. I do now. Later that night, while setting up our motion sensors near the mine entrance, Lucas wandered ahead, only a few yards, gone less than 2 minutes. But when he returned, his hands were covered in blood. "Whose blood is that?" I asked. He blinked like he didn't know what I meant. Then he looked down and started trembling. I thought it was you," he whispered. "I thought you were..." He couldn't finish, and I didn't push. I reviewed the sensor footage. No movement, but on frame 206 and there was something standing behind Lucas in the fog, just for a second. Then it was gone. It wasn't the werewolf. It wasn't Bigfoot. It was something else. Tall, thin, faceless, watching. They say the woods are empty at night, but they're wrong. It's just that the things inside are watching quietly, waiting for you to look away. Lucas wouldn't talk about what happened that night. Not the blood, not the fog, not the figure. He just sat near the fire, staring into the flames like they were going to speak. Calla watched him closely. She muttered prayers in some old language I couldn't place, half Cherokee, half something older. Her hands trembled as she painted black sigils on stones with ashes from the chapel's altar. I wanted to believe this was all some elaborate hallucination, that we were sleep-deprived, maybe even gas leaking from an old mine shaft. Then the ground breathed. I don't mean shook. I mean breathed. A slow, rising pulse of air from the moss-covered ground beneath us, like something slumbered below and dreamed of breaking through. Lucas screamed in his sleep that night, said something was crawling under his skin. I found him clawing at his chest, red streaks tearing through his shirt. "I can feel it," he gasped. "Like teeth inside me." We tried to leave, packed what little gear we had and made for the trailhead. Calla said she'd guide us, but the trail was gone. The GPS spun in circles. The sun refused to rise fully, just a dim red glow behind endless mist. We walked for hours, somehow always returned to the stone circle. That's when Lucas snapped. I stood in the circle, arms raised, eyes wild, muttering something from our father's journal. Words that didn't belong to him. Words that bent the air. The ground cracked open. A low growl rippled across the clearing. Primal. Ancient. Wrong. From the tree line, the werewolf emerged. Not a monster. A sentinel. Black fur streaked with ash, glowing amber eyes, not mindless, but burdened. Every step was deliberate, every breath pained. Then came the other, Bigfoot. Massive, covered in moss and scars, its eyes burned with wrath. And when it saw Lucas chanting, it roared, not at us, at the circle, at what was coming through. The air snapped, the stones shivered. And in that moment I saw it, under the soil, writhing between roots and bones. The hollow, not a creature, a presence, a hunger given shape. The thing they'd both been trying to hold back for centuries. I tackled Lucas out of the circle just as the first claw burst through the ground. The werewolf lunged in, fangs and claws in a body of muscle and fury. It tore into the thing emerging, shreds of rotten bone scattering like dead leaves. Bigfoot didn't fight the werewolf, it fought with it, and that's when I understood. This wasn't a rivalry, it was a partnership, a sacred one. One guardian to protect the balance, one to punish those who disrupted it. Together, they were the pact, and we had broken it. The creatures roared and fought together like twin gods against a birthing darkness. We ran. Calla screamed for us to head to the mine shafts, said the iron walls would hold, that the hollow hated metal forged by man. We reached the old mine just before the forest howled, not wind, not wolves, the land itself. We barricaded the entrance with rusted tools and half-collapsed rail carts. The air inside was stale, the walls damp, the ground slick with mineral veins and old blood. Lucas collapsed. His breathing was shallow, his eyes flicked with golden light. "Something's inside me," he whispered. I think it came through. When I spoke those words, I looked to Calla. She didn't deny it. "He's a vessel," she said. "The hollow marked him. It needs a voice. And your brother read its name." She handed me a blade, old, forged from mountain iron, engraved with runes. "If it takes him fully," she said, "you'll need to stop him before it speaks again." I couldn't respond, because just then, Lucas opened his mouth and someone else's voice came out. Not a scream, not a cry, but a whisper older than fire. "Unseal me. If you've heard a voice in your dreams that didn't belong, you may already be part of the pact. Don't answer. Don't repeat. Don't listen." Lucas didn't scream. Even as his jaw locked open and that ancient voice slithered out, his eyes were blank, too calm, too hollow, like he wasn't there anymore, just a shell echoing something older. I gripped the iron blade tighter, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't hurt my brother. Not yet. Calla, on the other hand, moved quickly. She began to draw symbols in the dirt with ash and crushed bone, chanting something guttural and clipped. Her voice trembled, but her hands didn't. "It's not too late," she said. "The hollow's only begun to root. We can bind it again, but we'll need to reach the pack site before the moon's peak." "Why the circle?" I asked. She didn't look at me. "Because that's where the last guardian died, that's where your bloodline broke the pact." I froze. "What?" Calla stopped drawing. "It was your ancestor who spilled the pact blood. Your family helped bind the hollow centuries ago, and then betrayed it. The curse isn't random. It's you, Owen, and your brother." My legs buckled. The journal, the obsession, the pull to this place. It wasn't just research, it was a summons. Lucas whimpered. The glow in his eyes pulsed. The thing inside him laughed, soft and low. "He remembers now," it whispered. "The one who ran, the one who lived." And in that moment, it clicked. The journal wasn't our father's. It was our grandfather's. The one who disappeared in Greystone Hollow in 1952. The one no one ever found. The hollow hadn't let him leave. It had waited. Lucas convulsed. His body cracked and popped, tendons straining like wires under tension. Not transformation, possession. The hollow was unfolding him from the inside out. Calla threw bone dust over him, shouting a final incantation. Lucas collapsed into a seizure, foaming, growling, sobbing, and then stillness. He was breathing, but he wasn't the same. I looked at Calla. "Is it gone?" "No," she whispered. "It saw through him, that's enough. We had to return to the stone circle, rebind the pact with blood. But not just any blood. My blood. Why me? I asked. Because balance demands it, Calla said. You were spared once. That debt is due. We left the mine as dusk began to rot the horizon. Fog moved like ink across the trees. The air smelled of iron, pine, and rot. The stone circle pulsed in the distance, like a heartbeat waiting to burst. The guardians were already there. The werewolf stood at the edge, panting, wounded, claws dripping black ichor. Bigfoot leaned on one arm, hunched and shaking as if it had been drained of something sacred. The Hollow's influence was spreading, and now it had our faces. In the shadows near the stones, I saw them, mirror versions of us, one with Lucas's face pale and stretched, one with mine, twisted in a permanent smile. They didn't move. They just watched. The Hollow wasn't just hunting us. It was becoming us. If you're still listening, it's already seen you. Share this story before it forgets you were ever here. The ground was warm beneath the circle, not just warm, breathing. Every step sent up steam through the moss. The stones hummed like tuning forks stuck between life and death. Lucas walked beside me, quiet now, too quiet. His steps mirrored mine, perfectly, too perfectly. I began to wonder if it was still really him. Calla noticed it too. She kept her distance, never taking her eyes off him. Her charm bag clicked softly with each step, bones tapping like a countdown. The Hollow is watching. Through him, she said. Maybe it always was. But he's fighting it, I argued. She didn't answer. The creatures were still in the circle, wounded but not retreating. The werewolf bled from its flank, slow and steady. Bigfoot limped, fur matted with burns from some unnatural heat. And yet, they stood, like sentinels at the gates of something they feared even more than each other. I stepped into the circle. The earth pulsed. The guardians bowed their heads. That's when I knew this wasn't just about rebalancing a pact. It was about replacing what had been lost. There was supposed to be a third guardian, the one who bound them, the one who chose when wrath or balance would prevail. That was the role our ancestor betrayed. That was the role the Hollow wanted to erase and inhabit. Lucas began to shake, his nose bled, his fingernails blackened. And then he looked at me, not with the Hollow's eyes but his own. Owen, he whispered. Kill me, now. But it was too late. He dropped to the ground, convulsing as his body tore itself apart, not shifting into a beast, but unraveling into something else. Bone folding backward, skin stretching over a shadow that wasn't his. He screamed, then laughed. A new voice emerged from his throat. You broke the circle, it rasped. Now let it close with your screams. The fake versions of us, the Hollowborn, stepped closer. Silent, watching, learning. Calla pulled out the iron blade again and pressed it into my palm. The pact must be sealed with your blood, and his must be ended. I stood paralyzed. The werewolf snarled low as if begging me to act. Bigfoot slammed a fist into the ground, cracking the stone under its weight. Rage and pain intermingled. I stepped forward. Lucas looked up at me. For a flicker, just one moment, his eyes were his. Again. Do it, he begged. Please, don't let it take me. And I plunged the blade into his chest, not out of hate, out of love. The circle ignited in crimson fire. The stones screamed. The Hollow recoiled, writhing out of Lucas like black vapor, shrieking in 1,000 forgotten tongues. The ground split open. From it a hand emerged, skeletal, covered in bark, made of hunger. And then came the voice. Not Lucas, not the mimic, but something deeper. One must take the burden, Calla cried out. The pact must be bound to flesh. The werewolf looked to me. So did Bigfoot, and the circle answered by branding my palm with its symbol. 3 claws, 1 eye, 1 fang. I understood then. To restore the pact, one must become it. I took my brother's place. I bled into the stones. I gave my name to the Hollow so it would sleep again. But I don't think I walked away whole. I think I left something behind, something that still watches from the fog, Blood pooled around my feet. The symbols on the stones pulsed like living veins. The forest had gone utterly still, as if the trees were holding their breath, watching to see if I'd survive what came next. Lucas's body lay still inside the circle, his face peaceful again. Whatever part of him remained had gone with dignity. But the hollow, it wasn't finished. It hovered above the circle now, like smoke wrapped in skin. No form, just shifting shadow, shaped by memory, hate, and hunger. It screamed in all the voices it had ever stolen, including mine. Calla collapsed outside the ring, her energy spent. The werewolf and Bigfoot stood guard at opposite ends of the circle, breathing heavily, trembling as if even they feared what was about to happen. And I felt it enter me. Not fully, not like Lucas, but just enough to brand me. I saw flashes, memories that weren't mine, centuries of blood and betrayal, rituals beneath eclipses, sacrifices willingly made. My ancestor standing in this very circle, his blade refusing, the final cut. The pact shattered not by malice but by cowardice, and now it came to me. Finish what he couldn't. The stones cracked beneath my knees. The ground heaved, and then the hollow struck. It didn't lunge, it whispered, a voice inside my head offering peace, power, the end of pain. Let go, it said. You'll be safe inside me. No guilt, no fear, no loneliness. I saw myself, kneeling beside Lucas, refusing to lift the blade. I saw the forest consumed, the werewolf torn in half, Bigfoot crumbling to dust, Calla strangled by vines made of hair and bone. I almost believed it until I heard Lucas's voice again. Not the hollow's echo, but his. And choose. I screamed and drove the iron blade into the center of the circle. The earth split. Blinding surge of crimson light burst upward, ripping through the hollow's form, burning it from within. It howled, not in pain, but in loss, as it was dragged back underground by invisible chains of bone and ash. The werewolf howled in unison, mournful and proud. Bigfoot let out a deep, resonant groan like thunder rolling through the hollow hills. Then silence. Real silence. The circle cooled. The fog lifted. The forest exhaled. I collapsed. I woke hours later beside the ruins of the chapel. The werewolf stood nearby, eyes locked on mine. Not aggressive, not protective, just watching, a new guardian. Calla knelt beside me, bloodied and exhausted. It's done, she said. For now. I looked at my hand. The brand still burned there. What happens now? I asked. She nodded toward the tree line. You walk the hollow. And I did. I left that town with the fog at my back and weight in my bones. I walk now between places people avoid. I feel when something ancient stirs beneath the surface, when the pact trembles. I'm not human anymore. Not completely. But someone has to stand at the threshold. Someone has to remember, a lone figure, me, walking through fog-choked woods beneath a pale blood moon. Behind me, distant howls. Ahead, an old stone circle pulsing faintly beneath the moss. I stop, look at the camera, and whisper, if you're hearing this, you've already been marked. It's been months since I left Greystone Hollow, at least I think it has. Time feels different now. I don't sleep much. I dream in fog. I smell the earth even when I'm nowhere near it. I hear things behind closed doors, and sometimes I answer. The mark on my palm hasn't faded. Some nights it burns, pulsing with the rhythm of footsteps I can't hear but know are there. The hollow may have been sealed, but it's not gone. It never really goes. It waits, like the forest, like me. I pass through towns where the trees grow too tall and the wind avoids certain corners. I feel when someone else has stepped too deep, wandered too far, whispered the wrong name. The air thickens, the animals vanish, the moss creeps inward, and I know, starting again. Sometimes I see Lucas in my dreams, not possessed, not broken, just there, sitting beside a campfire, smiling with that dumb look he always had after catching something real on camera. Sometimes I wonder if I should have joined him, let the hollow take me too. But then I remember what he said, even at the edge of transformation. Choose. I chose this path. I chose to carry the guilt so no one else would. That's what guardians do, we remember. So you don't have to, but you should still be careful. If you find a clearing in the woods surrounded by stones, don't step inside. If the forest goes quiet, don't listen. And if you see someone who looks like you, standing just at the edge of the trees, smiling too wide, run. Maybe you're safe for now. But the next moon is coming, and the Hollow remembers every name it was forced to forget. Don't answer the whisper. Don't repeat the story. And for the love of whatever still walks with you in the dark, don't break the pact. And for those who hunger for more, step deeper into the shadows with our ultimate werewolf horror playlist, linked in the description below. In the world of horror, the scariest things happen when you least expect them. And trust me, you don't want to be left in the dark. Welcome to the darkness.